From the Weston A. Price Foundation, welcome to the Wise Traditions podcast for wise traditions in food, farming, and the healing arts. We are your source for scientific knowledge and traditional wisdom to help you achieve optimal health. And now here is our host and producer, Hilda Labrada Gore.
Hey, Hilda here. Are you interested in starting a garden, but not sure where to start? Do brown thumbs run in the family? No green thumb, no problem. This is episode 479, and our guest today is Jill Ragan. Jill is the author of The Tiny But Mighty Farm and the owner of Whispering Willow Farm, nestled in central Arkansas. Jill is an educator, inspiring and encouraging thousands on her social media platforms and YouTube. Today, Jill gives simple and practical ideas for where to start. She gives ideas of what to plant and why. She goes over basics for the novice, why soil health is critical, for example. And she offers tools for the more experienced gardener, including how to use a string trellis and why it's superior to cages and other more conventional gardening systems. Jill also goes over how to manage pests without harsh pesticides. Think insect netting and hand picking, and why she is convinced you can't afford not to garden for your health. Finally, Jill explains how she did everything wrong at first, which is also why she is committed to educating future gardeners. She made mistakes so that we don't have to. Before we get into the conversation, I want to let you know censorship is real. Let's have a direct line of communication. Join the Weston A. Price Foundation email list to stay abreast of action alerts in your area, along with important topics of interest, food freedom, upcoming events, and more. We'll keep you posted on all of it. We also won't spam you, so we will be judicious in what we send you. Go to westonaprice.org and click on the yellow button on our homepage to sign up for our email list. I'll put a link in the show description to make it easy for you to join us, and you'll get just what you need. This is Hilda Labrada Gore, and you're listening to Wise Traditions. Welcome to Wise Traditions, Jill. We're so glad you're here.
Thank you. Thanks for having me today.
So I know you have a history of farming, of providing for your family, but you also have a history of educating, inspiring, and encouraging people that want to garden. And that is the focus of today's podcast. I just want you to really frame it for beginners. Where do we even start if we want to start a garden? And I feel like it can be overwhelming when we stop and notice that you have to pay attention to the climate, where you live, what plants thrive there, and all these things. It can seem like a lot. So where do you begin? Tips for beginners, please.
Yeah, that's a great question. I would really start by encouraging people to be motivated with the spaces that they're in, right? We live in a culture of this go big, go home, right? You have to, if you want to provide food for your family, you have to sell your house in the suburbs. You have to buy a big piece of land. You need, tractors and equipment. And I really just want to encourage you guys, that's not true. Whether you are in an apartment, whether you are in, suburbia, or maybe you are rural in the country, you can grow food where you are. So one, if you're a beginner, I want you to be encouraged by that. And two, yes, there are a lot of things that, play into effect of that climate zone. But one, you have to have a plan. Like, what is it that you are wanting to do and achieve? And I feel like for many of us, it's very easy and common to want to do all of the things, grow all of the things, be that person we are inspired by on social media. I am guilty of it myself. But really, you're going to get overwhelmed. You're going to end up having a lot of issues, whether that's with, pests, disease, burnout, you name it. And so I like to encourage beginners, before you ever even plant a seed, buy soil, whatever, sit down at your table with a pen and a notepad and let's get back to the basics. What is it that you are wanting to achieve? Are you wanting to reduce your grocery budget? Maybe you just want to not have to buy tomatoes for the year. So you want to can all your salsa, all your diced tomatoes, your marinara sauce. Like, what is that tangible, attainable goal that you can do with relatively no experience? So instead of growing a garden that you've got, tomatoes, peppers, squash, zucchini, cucumbers, you have 20 different varieties and you have no idea how to grow these, but you set the goal of, I don't want to have to buy any tomato products from the grocery store. So you just focus that first season on growing tomatoes. You're learning about varieties that do well in your climate. You're learning how to add amendments. You're learning how to prune those tomatoes and trellis those tomatoes. So really you have to have a clear idea of what is your goal and your family's goals, and then be okay with starting small. And then that next garden year, maybe you add jalapenos. Maybe we're talking about, okay, now we want to make some salsa for the year. So we're going to add in another crop. We're going to learn how to really nurture that crop, how that crop grows and thrives in our climate. And then just each year keep adding on that. But really just don't overwhelm yourself. Have a clear plan with realistic expectations.
Oh my gosh, I love that as a starting place. And I'm not a huge planner, but I think if you just even ask yourself the question you were saying, Jill, like, what do I really want? Like, what is my goal here? And you've also helped us to realize we need realistic goals and realistic expectations. And you're also reminding me of something Justin Rhodes said a while ago, which is only plant what you're going to actually eat or use. Because what if you don't like squash? For goodness sakes, don't plant it, right?
Right. Or for us, we deal with squash bugs so bad and they're super invasive. So for me, it is more affordable, better use of my time and labor to go buy squash and zucchini from the farmer's market every year than grow it myself. You will not catch me growing corn. You will not catch me growing squash or zucchini. There's no efficient way to trellis that. It brings in pests. It's just not worth it. So I can support another farmer that has just dedicated his whole career to just like, all right, we're going to combat against these. I'm going to succession plant it. And so again, it goes back to, I don't have to do it all. I'm not called to do it all. I'm going to feel good about what I'm doing. And I'm going to source out the things that would require more time, energy, and labor out of me.
Jill, what did you start with? I'm curious.
So I started with everything, which is why I give the advice I give today. So my first little suburban backyard, I grew watermelons and tomatoes and beans. And I joke about it in my book that these things literally rotted on my kitchen counter because I didn't eat them. I grew a garden before I learned how to adapt a healthy lifestyle. So I was in college for agriculture, took a plant science class and was like, sold, right? I want to do this. So I borrowed a David Brown tractor from my employer at the time, tilled up my backyard. Now I practice and teach no-till, so just so many things, but I grew everything. I got really overwhelmed and I had no success, but that was a good learning opportunity for me of like, well, why did I grow tomatoes if I hated tomatoes? And why did I grow, cantaloupe when that's not even really something I buy at the store? And so it allowed me to really realize that, okay, there has to be a little bit of strategy, to this. And now years later, a decade in, so much of the success of my garden is from planning. And by nature, I'm not a planner at all. I'm very much a free spirit. I do what feels right, very intuitive. But to reach the goals I want to reach for my family, I have to dedicate and be more goal-oriented when it comes to the garden.
And I feel like I'm wired like you. Like I like to kind of go where the wind blows, what I'm feeling, right? But I still plan things. I think, what am I going to eat for breakfast? How are we going to do this barbecue with the family? I am planning. So I don't think there's anyone who doesn't plan something. Life doesn't just happen by accident.
Right.
So I want to ask you now, I have a friend who's into this and has a lot more land than I do, but she's also just making better use of her land than I do. She has a lot of little seedlings or sprouts inside under certain lights. Is it at this time of year, it's May, and I know it varies according to zone, but is it too late to get going with the garden? And should we start with seedlings or seeds?
Yeah, not at all. It's never too late, right? Because we can always grow something, and we do a lot of succession planting, which is how we are able to grow year round. So literally every single week, whether it's food or flowers, I have things that I'm starting and I'm transplanting out. And that is how we achieve the success of growing year round. The downfall of succession planting in some of our zones and waiting later after when most people would deem the normal time to plant a garden is if you are wanting to buy transplants, you might have a harder time sourcing that. So we're super rural, and you're only finding transplants at an associated farmers co-op, so a feed store. Well, they're only going to be carrying those during the peak time. You can't even find those in the fall and the winter. So for me to achieve year-round gardening, I have to start my things from seed. And I'm growing a lot of the things that I don't have access to here. So one, even if you don't have a large piece of land, but you have a shelf, a dresser, you've got some grow lights, a rack, you can easily be starting your own things inside and make that one-time investment that you can use year after year, year round. So you can certainly start from seed if you have access to buy transplants. I would say that if that overwhelms you, don't start there. If that's going to prevent you from starting a garden, go to a garden center and try to buy whatever you can buy. The great thing is, too, most garden centers are discounting their plants right now because they technically think you've missed the window. So you can go and start your garden relatively very affordable, especially for organic starts. So really, it depends on what's going to overwhelm you, what's going to set you up for success. If you are challenged by that, you like the idea of starting from seed and nurturing it, do it. But if that's going to die and it's going to discourage you and you're never going to get it in the ground, just buy the transplant, and there's nothing wrong with that either.
Okay, that's great advice and a big relief to some of us here. Now, what if the soil where you live is not conducive to having a garden?
Yeah, so that is my soil. We live on a ridge in central Arkansas, and we probably have the worst plot of land I've ever lived on, ever. And so we have massive rocks and boulders. My husband jokes that we can't grow grass, we grow rocks, but it is true. And we didn't quite realize how big of a challenge that was going to be until we bought our farm. And so we cannot use any native soil. And so what we are having to do is we are having to budget for that. And we've had to figure out those costs. And so we pay a dump truck driver every single season to come and drop loads of organic compost. And then we've built out all of our beds. Some of them were raised beds that were on our farm when we bought it. Since we've been here, we have prepped in-ground permanent beds. So it's still beds on top of the soil, but there's no permanent border or structure around it like a raised bed. And then we're just amending that every single year. So we're adding all of our different trace minerals and, NP and K and everything like that. And so I would encourage you, if that is the case, is how worth it is it to you, right? For me, we live just a ways from a grocery store. So our farm before here, it took an hour to get to the nearest grocery store. It was a necessity for me to grow my own food. And so I would do whatever it took. And so if you have bad soil, that's very, very common. You can bring in compost. You can keep adding. If your native soil is just get a soil test, see what it's lacking in. If it can improve, I always tell people soil is the life and longevity of your farm and garden. You can't afford to not prioritize it, which stinks because it's not sexy, right? Talking about soil doesn't get people excited. We're not like, oh my gosh, but it is absolutely a necessity. And I think that's where a lot of our success derives from, is because I realize that without nutrients in the soil, that is the life of everything it will produce. So we've been very intentional about bringing in organic compost. We top dress and amend every single season. We're taking soil tests every season. We're really prioritizing that. But if it is just, not good land, not usable, just source it out, bring in some compost, amend it, and make it better over time.
That's great advice. I live in a city and I didn't do any fancy testing, but I knew that the soil in our backyard was full of toxins, lead, so forth, And so what we did was we built a little raised bed. It's modest, but it was a place to start, right?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Containers, raised beds. There's so many options at our scale. Raised beds, we're transitioning away from that. It doesn't make sense, but it is a great option for so many people, especially if you're in a backyard setting. It's going to be more aesthetic. It's going to be easier to manage and maintain. There's a lot of reasons why people would think raised beds are a pro. For us, they're more of a con just because of our gardening style. We're more market gardeners, so it's more these permanent raised beds without structures, which makes it easier for us when we're flipping beds, when we're managing beds, cultivating them. So our, purposes are a little bit different than the backyard home gardener.
Did you ever think years ago that you would be encouraging and inspiring and educating about gardening?
Yes and no. So I'm like a wild dreamer. So when I have something in my head, there's no stopping me. I would say when I was in college taking that plant science class, no, I had no idea where it would go. But then at some point when I had my first daughter, and I felt like a veil had kind of been lifted, and I had this huge reality check of whoa, I'm a really unhealthy person. There are these toxins and chemicals and things I'm unaware of. And then I had this life that I had to take care of, right? And that was reliant on me. And that to me was when the switch flipped. And I was like, okay, it's not just about me now. Like, I have to do better for her. And at that point, I knew that I was going to change my lifestyle for the better. And I wanted to encourage as many people and open up their eyes, because for me, it was a lack of unawareness. Like, I just did not realize the problem and the harm to what I was doing. And I'm one of those people that once I become aware, I have to take action. And so I was like, how can I do this in an encouraging way that doesn't overwhelm people, that doesn't judge people or condemn them? It's like, hey, this is where I started, where I was, having no money, working a job outside of the farm. Like, this is what was manageable for me. And it was like cloth diapering my kid. That was something I could do to make me feel better about what I was doing. And so at that point, I do think I realized, like, okay, this is my mission now, to encourage people to grow food, to grow flowers, to cultivate joy, really just to live a life that's in harmony. I feel like we're so disconnected from natures. We don't really know how to be stewards of the earth anymore. And I really feel called to, in an inspiring and encouraging way, pull people back to the garden, back to how I feel like we were originally supposed to live.
Coming up, Jill discusses ways to keep the soil healthy in garden beds. She also offers tips and tricks for maintaining an organic garden.
You're listening to the Wise Traditions podcast from the Weston A. Price Foundation. We pause now to recognize our sponsors.
Maui Nui. Maui Nui Venison is a mission-based food company bringing the healthiest red meat on the planet directly to your door. You will love their meat and their mission. First of all, their meat is top quality venison. Seriously delicious and easy to cook. The whole family can enjoy it. And don't let the word venison throw you. This meat is so clean and tender, you will love it. Ethically, you can feel great about Maui Nui venison. This is the only stress-free, 100% wild harvested red meat on the market. Maui Nui is a one-of-a-kind operation, over a decade in the making. It is actively helping restore balance to vulnerable ecosystems and communities in Hawaii. You have to try their all-natural venison jerky sticks for an optimal 10 grams of protein and just 55 calories. I can vouch for how good these are. Visit mauinuivenison.com/wise to take advantage of this limited time offer and get 20% off your first order, including your first subscription. Make sure to get on the notification list so you are ready when memberships are released. Again, that's mauinuivenison.com/wise for 20% off your first order of fresh venison, jerky, broth, and ohana subscription. Enjoy! And the New Biology Clinic. Modern healthcare systems are failing us. Months-long waits for appointments are typical, only to spend 10 minutes with the doctor who quickly makes a generic diagnosis, resulting in medication dependency, invasive treatment options, and unpleasant or harmful side effects, with no real cure in sight. If this sounds all too familiar, consider a different approach with the New Biology Clinic founded by Dr. Tom Cowan. Tom is a respected alternative medicine doctor, author, and speaker. Dr. Cowan's holistic perspective on health and wellness and the true nature of health and disease sets this clinic apart. At the New Biology Clinic, it's not about quick fixes. The practitioners take time to understand your unique story, recognizing that illnesses have various causes, and you deserve a personalized healing experience. Clinic members enjoy a flat monthly fee that includes a range of valuable services like virtual health consults as needed, practitioner-led live streams on diverse health topics, access to a members-only resource library, and multiple live group sessions every month. These sessions cover fitness, breathing integration, biofield tuning, guided meditation, EFT tapping, and more. There are membership options for individuals, small and large families, pet health, and enrichment only, and even one-time health consults without a membership commitment. Unlike traditional healthcare that thrives on frequent visits, prescriptions, and treatments, the New Biology Clinic's motivation is to get you healthy and keep you that way. Visit newbiologyclinic.com to learn more, or reach out to their friendly care team via phone or email. Your journey to genuine healing begins here. Again, that's newbiologyclinic.com. This is Hilda Labrada Gore, and you're listening to Wise Traditions. I have a question for you. You mentioned no-till earlier or something like that. Is that the same as not weeding, or is it just not turning over the earth? Talk to us a little bit about your gardening approach.
Yeah, so we do a no-till approach, meaning we have no like tractors or infrastructure. So we're not ever, and when you're tilling, you have to go beyond like the first 3 inches of soil to be considering disturbing the native soil and all of those healthy microbiomes that are in there. So we don't do anything like that because it is decreasing the value of your soil fertility. But weeding and even like broad forking. So when we amend our beds, essentially we're top dressing them, meaning we're adding our organic compost, we're adding our amendments based off of what our soil is deficient in. So for some of our flowers, we just added azomite, which are trace minerals. We added feather meal, which is the slow release nitrogen. And then we added a mix of like NP and K. And so we'll do that. And then we take our broad fork and we're literally just working it in the soil. So it is loosening up our soil, getting it ready for planting. It is just disturbing those first few inches, allowing those nutrients to really seep into the soil, and we'll water it well. And then cultivating, we cultivate on a weekly basis. That is not disturbing anything. You are going to have to manage your weeds. You're going to get really overwhelmed. So we're a certified naturally grown farm. So we can't really do anything as far as like, we can't spray anything, which is great, but we have to be very diligent on cultivating to make sure that we're managing weed pressure, especially because we have some like invasive native grasses like Bermuda, and that's really hard. And so every single Wednesday is our cultivation day, and we're going through and we're cultivating all of our beds. Some of that looks like cultivating by hand. We use a lot of stirrup hoes, long-handled weeding tools just to make it easier on our back. But no, I definitely think cultivating is something that's put yourself on a schedule. I have a daily chore chart. So like Tuesdays, I'm pruning and trellising. Wednesdays, I'm cultivating. Fridays, I'm starting seeds and transplanting. Like each day, I've got a chore that needs to be done on a weekly basis, which makes it super manageable versus me not weeding for a month and then spending all day in 90-degree heat. Like that's not a good use of my time. But if I spend 10 to 20 minutes every Wednesday doing it, it's much more manageable for me to keep up with.
Yeah, this reminds me of a woman I heard about years ago that kind of gave advice about cleaning your house. I think she was called the Fly Lady because she would talk to people whose closets are overflowing. And she's like, just do 10 minutes, literally set your timer and do 10 minutes. Because if you do 10 minutes at a time, it's a lot less overwhelming. And so I'm hearing you say something akin to that when it comes to gardening. Do it in such a way that you're maintaining and not getting overwhelmed with weeds and chores.
Absolutely. And that was something I learned the hard way. And even when I worked a job outside of the farm and I farmed part-time, I'd get home from work and it was, 10 minutes before I even came in the house. So I would park the car, go straight out to the garden, do this for 10 minutes before I ever walked in the house, said hello to the kids, said hello to my husband. And it was just a way I could stay on top of it. Even when I don't, especially at our scale, it just gets so overwhelming so quickly. And some of these things, when it comes to pruning and trellising, like you have that window or you've missed it, right? Like if I'm not trellising appropriately and my cucumber plant, snaps over and dies, well, then I've got to start that from seed again. Like that's cost me something, right? If my sucker's gotten too big and created another main leader that's now I can't prune it, well, then I have to trellis differently. That's going to start messing with my airflow that I had planned out. So like for me, it is all really strategic. And the fact that we're trying to grow as much food as possible as we can for our family. And so we've got to be diligent with these daily chores that we're doing.
And speaking of strategic, I'm curious, do your kids lend a hand with all this stuff?
Yeah, so my 4-year-old actually works with us every day. She's like the best farm hand ever, which nobody turned me in. But yeah, she gets up with us every single day and works with us. And then my 8-year-old goes to a nature school, which is great. So she's got a garden at school. She has to take care of chickens, everything like that. So she's very accustomed to that. And then when they get home, they do have to help us. And during the summertime, they work for us. They get money put on a debit card that goes into an account for them. So whether that's them helping me harvest flowers to earn income or They have to help harvest cucumbers and ferment them. It is definitely a family effort. We also don't do like TV or electronics. So it's like they're outside with me because what else would they be doing? Like there's, like they're playing, but it's not like they have the alternative of just coming inside and watching television. So our kids are very involved. They've always been very involved to where it doesn't seem like work to them. It's just pretty natural that this is what we do on the, day in and day out.
And how do you think that's helping them grow, Jill?
One, they're just so aware. I want my kids to be intelligent, but I don't I don't want to raise the smartest kid or the kid that gets all A's. Like, I want to raise a child that is aware of the impact that their lives have, right? And like, you get to make a decision that is either for the betterment of the earth or not. And so we talk about that a lot of like, we raise animals and it's hard. But if we don't raise animals, do we know where we're sourcing our animals from? Do we feel good about that? And so for me, that's something I'm really proud of, because when my kids think about growing food, they don't ever think about, hey, we need to go to Walmart to buy groceries. They say, hey, Mom, can I go out into the tunnel and get some cucumbers for a snack? Like, they're very aware that if you want food, you grow it yourself. When we're eating, lamb, they ask, well, did we raise this lamb, or what farm did it come from? It's not, one, the fact that my kids are of that age and they're asking that question, there's the connection anyways, versus we have kids come over and they're eating chicken. They're like, did this come from a cow? And we're like, where is the disconnect here, right? But there's such a massive disconnect. And so while my kids may not grow up to be farmers, they may not take over the farm, that's fine. I do believe that my kids will grow up being aware that, you grow your own food, you live a life that benefits nature, works in harmony with nature, not against it, and that this is how we do that and accomplish that.
Wow. This is something that we're working toward always at the Weston A. Price Foundation, is raising awareness. Education is one of our mainstays. And so I think how lovely that your kids have this, but I also think how many of us still need it. So that's why we're having you on, Jill. Let's circle back. We were talking about equipment earlier and the kind of hose and things that you use. What else is needed? Talk to me about cages and trellising a little bit.
Yeah, so I actually believe that you don't need a lot to be successful. It all goes back to how you're choosing to grow. And so like, we don't grow in any sort of cages or on cattle panels or anything like that. We do more of a string trellis option, and that's for a few reasons. So I was farming by myself for years before my husband was able to come home. And so for me, I needed a system and equipment that I could implement myself. So if I had to put up a cattle panel trellis and I had to drive T-posts, and these are 7-foot long T-posts, and then I had to carry a panel by myself, like, that was not a chore or a task that I could do by myself. So I had to really figure out, what can I implement myself? And so that's when I really started leaning towards string trellising. So I use jute twine, compostable clips. I've got conduit that I run at the top of my high tunnels, which is great because I could actually get on a ladder, throw these on there myself. It was pretty easy. Attach a string trellis. Again, it's great because at the end of the season, I can cut it down and everything I use is compostable. So I'm not having to take off plastic clips. I'm not having to worry about plastic tomato twine. Everything I have then goes from the garden into the compost bin and decomposes. And so I think a lot of the trellising is going to be dependent on what you have the resources to do. Cattle panels are also really expensive. T-posts are really expensive, and so to put up a massive cattle panel with T-posts, that requires a lot. To put up a string trellis, you need a T-post at one end. So, and then just PVC T. So you go from needing 2 T-posts, which I could drill, versus if I had, 2 16-foot cattle panels, I'm putting those every 2 feet, 3 feet. That's requiring more energy out of me. That's requiring more cost investment. And so that's just kind of some of the things we think about. We do a lot of rebar trellising. So we'll buy big things of rebar, we cut them to our lengths. We'll use horticulture netting if we're growing different flowers, or we'll do the jute twine and we'll do kind of like a corral method. So like with our peppers, for instance, we'll put rebar, and then we'll take this jute twine and we'll kind of corral them in to where they stay in the bed. And so we just try to figure out what is something I can do by myself, what's something that's not going to cost and break the bank for all these different spaces, and what's just going to be the easiest to maintain. So when I'm thinking about pruning and trellising, what's the easiest way? If I've got as much vertical as I can on a string trellis, it makes it very easy for me to go through, prune every single week, clip and trellis every single week, versus a tomato cage. You're never gonna, don't buy tomato cages, y'all. They should not be allowed. I feel like, but it's gonna be super hard to prune those. Your tomatoes, if they're indeterminate, are always going to grow taller than that cage, right? Because indeterminate tomato is going to keep growing and keep growing. And so what I do is I let my indeterminate tomatoes and my cucumbers, they climb to the top of my high tunnel where I have this pipe. And then I just help them and they umbrella and climb all the way back down. So it's very, very efficient for me. Again, then I can just start pruning and trellising on the other side. So it really just kind of depends on your space, but you can implement that string trellis whether you're just have some raised beds in your backyard.
So I'm curious who came up with these cage ideas, these plastic containers and things. Was it just somebody trying to make a buck, or did they think it was more efficient at the time?
I really don't know. I think my eyes became open when I started shifting into the market garden space, right? So I'm a huge advocate for gardening, but I will say I feel like most backyard gardeners are not taught an efficient way to garden because production is not at the forefront, which is funny to me because most homesteaders are doing it for sustainability, but they're following practices that aren't efficient. And so I've really tried to change the narrative on this. How come you can't be a backyard gardener adapting professional growing techniques to one? Because when you think about a market gardener, they're doing this for their job. They have to be super efficient. They want to cut their labor costs and they want to grow as much food as possible because they need that income. Versus a hobbyist backyard gardener, they're not worried about these things. And so once I started really following and being mentored by market gardeners, that's when I realized everything I was taught and learned as a backyard gardener was it did not make sense at all. And I started immediately changing all my systems of cattle panel might work for you. Great. I'm not doing it. I don't have the time. I don't have the money. I don't have the energy to put up all these different cattle panels, take them down every single season. Because for us, we're growing year round. So to grow my fall crops, I'd have to take all of those cattle panels down from the summertime, put them all back up the next spring. That is so labor intensive. And when you really start cost evaluating this and doing your cost analysis, it's how much labor time did you spend to grow those tomatoes? Could I have bought those in bulk from an organic farmer and then not had to do that? Honestly, probably. And so these are all things that I'm thinking through. And of course, now I just think there's so many things in the garden industry that are just for, new ideas, ways to make money that they're definitely not necessary, which is why I tell people with tools, I've got my tool belt. So it's a pouch that goes onto my belt that carries my pruners, rubber bands, a Sharpie, and my phone. Non-negotiable, have to have it. I need one cultivating tool, have to have it. Other than that, there's not a lot of tools I'm using every single day aside from my tool belt, my pruners, and a cultivating tool.
Wow. Oh my gosh. Well, thank you so much for shedding light on this. And a lot of us know that not everything we hear is right. And not everything that's sold to us is being sold to us for our benefit. So thank you for giving us insights. Now I have a couple more questions before we start to wrap up, Jill. One is, you mentioned earlier that you don't plant squash because the pests or the insects get to them where you live. If we don't want to use standard pesticides and so forth, how can we take care of a pest or insect problem? Any suggestions there?
Yes. So we do a lot of hand picking. It's really good, again, to just keep eyes on your plants. So one, every single week we're going through. And there are some good OMRI certified, organic certified options. So we're spraying in the fall for our brassicas. We deal with caterpillars really, really bad. And so BT is certified. You can buy organic BT. And it just hooks up to your water hose and you'll spray it. And so what we like to do is when we put out our transplants, we'll spray them all really well. And then we'll put insect netting. And we will keep everything growing under the insect netting to prevent these pests. And then we're just removing that insect netting when we need to harvest. And so that has been very beneficial for us. But a lot of times, this isn't always true, but in most cases, if you are having a bad pest issue, it is derived from poor soil quality. So if you nurture your soil and you make sure you're feeding your soil, it is going to combat against those pests. And once you stop using those pesticides, you'll notice that your natural insects, those natural beneficial insects, are going to come. So we have so many ladybugs. Something else we'll do too, though, is we commonly will plant trap crops because we are a certified farm. And so eggplant happens to be a great one that will just attract all of the aphids. Well, if I can interplant my tomatoes with eggplants, and we don't eat as much eggplant as we eat tomatoes, then I'm kind of going to use that plant to be a sacrificial plant, let it feed off of that until it gets so bad that I will then rip it out and I will burn it. And then that helps a lot. But also just thinking about what are those beneficial plants you can plant in with things, basil, borage, marigold. We do a lot of interplanting, and a lot of our interplanting is with the mindset of what is this going to attract that is going to prevent it from messing with something that's more food, producing, something that we need more of. And so just be mindful of that of your planning. And sometimes you don't know the pest you're going to deal with until it comes up, but then that's a good opportunity to take notes. And then also if we ever have an infestation, just immediately pull the plant. But we grow a lot of hybrid varieties. And the reason we grow hybrids is because they are bred to be pest and disease resistant. So when we switch to primarily growing hybrids, that probably cut our pest issue by about 50%. And so that was huge for us because we had less input cost of BT and having to make homemade soaps and things like that. And so that's been a huge win for us because we do deal with certain pests. But for the most part, very rarely am I ripping out crops because it's just been infested with pest and disease. So nurture your soil, keep eyes on your plants regularly, interplant with companion plants, things that are going to attract those beneficial insects. That's going to be really, really good.
Of course, I can't help but see the parallel between nurturing our soil and nurturing our bodies, right? People are like, oh, I get a cold every winter, I get several, blah, blah, blah. And it's like, oh, what if we cultivated that healthy terrain? We would be less likely to have to deal with pests. But I wanted to ask you, is interplanting, the kind you've discussed, similar to companion planting? That's one question. And the second question is, there are probably people around us who are gardening as well. Can't we tap into some of those communities for tips on what pests might be coming and what will flourish where we live?
Yes, absolutely. Ask farmers, ask gardeners what they're doing. The bad thing is when you start asking bigger scaled farms, most of them are commercial. So just be mindful, if you are reaching out to a garden community, what are their standards of growing? Are they following a practice and going to tell you something like neem oil for years was considered safe. That actually kills off a lot of your beneficial insects. So for me, I wouldn't recommend I can't use neem. So it's something that was considered safe and natural goes against my certification. Why is that? So just make sure you're doing your own research as well, or maybe sourcing out an organic gardener, asking them for advice. As far as interplanting and companion planting, they are different. The purpose of companion planting is finding those plants that are compatible with each other, that will help each other grow, or in certain cases, like planting borage to, deter pests from a tomato or, whatever. There is more strategy involved as far as each of them are providing something else for the other plant. Interplanting is more of a market garden term where we are just maximizing space. So I have got a 3-foot bed. I have got a trellis on the back part of the bed, which right now have snap peas on it. Eventually it'll be green beans. Then right next to that, I've got celery, which is going to grow taller. It's not ever really going to interfere with my beans because my beans are just growing vertically. Then aside from the celery, I have got spinach, which is going to be lower growing, bushier. And then right beside that, I've got head lettuce that I know I'm going to be harvesting every week. So these are all staggered height. They're all going to come out at different times. It's more strategy of how do I maximize my bed space? Do they benefit each other? Is there a strategy on, well, this is going to attract that? No, most of them are spring greens. Most of them are going to come out at the same time. I'm not thinking about how they can benefit each other. I'm thinking about how can I maximize the space the best? And I'm interplanting at different heights, different depths, different timing to make sure that I'm always harvesting the most that I can out of that space.
Fantastic. All right, I have two more questions for you. One is, what do you say to the person who has no dirt under their fingernails, who thinks gardening is way too much effort?
Yeah, it is effort. I would tell you do it anyways, right? Because you never want to be in a place where you don't, I don't know, for me, I just welcome challenges. And then if it's too overwhelming, how do you make it manageable for you? But it's worth it, right? Just like if we don't nurture ourselves, if we don't take care of ourselves, provide it with the food and the nutrients and the sun and the air, if we don't do this, we're not going to thrive, right? Like we might not be dying, but we're not optimal. And that's how I view the garden. It's like at some point, what is your priority? Is it worth it to you? Do you want to live an optimal life in harmony? And if so, it's going to be challenging. It's going to be hard, but it's one of those things that I think we can't afford not to do, especially in the culture that we live in now. It's going to be harder to source these things out. Prices are going to continue to increase. We're going to continue to question, like just with how conventional food is sprayed and the harmful toxins and chemicals on that. It's like, I can't afford to not grow my own food for the sake of my family, for the sake of our health and our well-being. It's a non-negotiable for me. So really just like asking yourself, what is your priority? This is a conversation I'm currently having with my dad. We live very different lifestyles and he's having a lot of health issues. And like, Dad, you can't afford not to do this. Like your health and the life and longevity and the quality of your life and longevity depends on this. And so accept those challenges, make it as manageable for yourself as you can. Start with a few containers, start with one raised bed. He has finally started implementing some supplements. He feels great. So now he's like, well, I want to do this next step, right? So more than likely, it just takes that one positive change where they're like, man, I really didn't like this. This was really hard to, man, I'm really seeing how gratifying it is to grow my own food. The food tastes so much better. I can walk out my back door instead of having to hop in the car and drive to town. That more than likely, if they just say yes, they'll start to shift their mindset on how they view gardening. And most people who garden, we're all addicts, right? Like there's something about growing your own food that is just so captivating and so rewarding. So my hope is that they'll just say yes, and then we'll kind of be bitten by the bug and the rest is history.
Oh, that's beautiful. So your comment about your dad really ties into the last question I like to pose at the end of the show. If the listener could just do one thing to improve their health, Jill, what would you recommend that they do?
I would recommend they find what they could say yes to today, right? You're not going to fix everything. You can't dream of a garden one day and the next day have it. So something I told myself very early on is, what can I say yes to today? If that is planting one plant, one herb, spending 15 minutes outside barefoot, like what is it that you can do today and say yes to that thing? And then tomorrow ask yourself, what is the one thing I can say yes and I have control over today, and do that thing.
Wonderful. Well, thank you for saying yes to this interview. It has been an absolute delight.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Our guest today was Jill Ragan. You can visit her website, thewhisperingwillowfarm.com, to learn more. And I am Hilda Labrada-Gore, the host and producer of this podcast for the Weston A. Price Foundation. You can find me at holistichilda.com. And for the transcript for this podcast episode, visit our website, westonaprice.org, and click on the podcast page. And now for a podcast review from Apple Podcasts. Rosie78 said this: New here. I recently discovered the Weston A. Price Foundation, and I just started at the beginning and am listening to these episodes as fast as I can. I wish I had found it sooner, but I'm so optimistic about the positive changes I'm making for my family. Rosie78, this is great news to us. We are putting these episodes out week after week, also publishing a monthly journal and even holding an annual conference, all with you in mind. We want to equip you to live your healthiest and best life based on wise traditions. If you want to leave us a review, go to Apple Podcasts and do the same as Rosie78, or write us a letter to the editor and tell us why the show or any of our initiatives are making a difference for you. Write us at info@westinaprice.org. And thank you so much for listening, my friend. Stay well and remember to keep your feet on the ground and your face to the sun.
On behalf of the Weston A. Price Foundation, thanks for listening. We have many free resources to support you on your health journey. Visit westonaprice.org to find podcasts, articles, videos, and more. You can also find a local chapter near you for help in finding sources of great food. We invite you to support the Foundation's mission of education, research, and activism by becoming a member. Thanks again, and take care. Wise Traditions is a project of the Weston A. Price Foundation for wise traditions in food, farming, and the healing arts. The content on this podcast is provided for informational purposes only and is not intended to substitute for the advice provided by your doctor or other healthcare professional. It is not intended to be, nor does it constitute healthcare or medical advice.